This is Fire and Fate by Serena Valentino, Chapter 11. The Lighting of the Dead Woods. Hades paused the book of fairy tales with a dramatic flourish, bringing their party back to the present. They had been listening to Hades' story for hours. It was dark outside, and the tables were filled with empty teacups and little plates of cookie crumbs. I assume my mother's betrayed you, Circe said. How did you survive? Hades understood why she would think the worst of her mothers. They didn't betray me, little witch. They created two of me, just as I asked. Being in the Deadwoods with Circe, Primrose, and Hazel made him miss his friendship with the Odd Sisters. Hades had grown to think of Lucinda, Ruby, and Martha as family, and he was disappointed when their friendship eventually ended badly. But he had felt a protectiveness toward them, the same protectiveness he was now feeling toward Circe, and he wondered if it was because she embodied the things he loved most about her mothers. If the spell worked, then why is Zeus still ruling Olympus? Asked Circe. Bringing his mind back to the present, he decided the shortest answer would suffice. Because Zeus is a big old baby, and he has to have everything his way, and I guess it was, fated, he said with a flourish of hands. We're all just playthings, then, for witches like your dreaded fates and my mother's. I refuse to accept that, said Circe, and he could see how hurt she was. Seriously, Circe, what you, Primrose, and Hazel are doing for the Deadwoods and the many kingdoms, what you will do in the future, it's beautiful. It was meant to be. Primrose has seen it in her waking dreams. You are the Circe who was always meant to be queen, he said, smiling at her. Wait, are you saying all of this happened so I would become queen of the dead? She didn't look convinced, but Hades could see the changes her influence had already made. He could see the changes she would make in the future, together with Primrose and Hazel. Your mother started with good intentions, just like you. They felt everyone deserved someone to protect them, not just the princesses. And do you know why it was so important to them? Because they knew all too well what it was to be alone in the world, to not have someone to protect them until the day the goddess Circe agreed to be their sister. And I took that from them, left them alone to figure out how to create you. It's not entirely their fault they became corrupted, and they were no longer the witches they once were. And we know why that is, said Circe, looking out into the darkness of the dead woods. They chose to use the best parts of themselves to create you. Don't blame yourself. I'm the one responsible. I'm the one who sent the original Circe away. If I had been there to help them, as I promised, maybe things would have turned out differently. That's why I felt I owed your mothers one last favor, and agreed to take you from the place between. I ruined their lives, Circe. I owed them at least that. My only consolation is that if I hadn't sent the original Circe away, you would have never existed. You would have never become queen, and the Deadwoods would still be a place of terror. Hades noticed Jacob was standing in the doorway, waiting quietly until they stopped talking. So he directed his gaze at him and flashed his dagger-like smile, even though his heart was hurting to finally admit all of this aloud. He wasn't accustomed to sentimentalities, let alone sharing them with others. May we help you, good sir? Hades asked, smiling at the man. They all turned to look at Jacob. He was wearing a smart black velvet suit and top hat, with a small red rose pinned to his lapel. Hades was pleased with this happy diversion. Don't you look like the dandy gentleman, said Hades. All you're missing is a fancy walking stick. He snapped his fingers, and one appeared in Jacob's hand. It was long and black with a silver crow for a handle and a silver tip at the end. Thank you. I am most honored by your generous gift and spirit, said Jacob, spinning it with pride. It was the first time he'd seen Jacob smile since he had arrived in the Deadwoods. This was the sort of man he needed in the underworld. Hades had been taking mental notes during his time in the Deadwoods and was thinking about the changes he'd like to make when he got home. You're like something out of a Dickens novel. Oh, wait, you gotta say it. You'll be visited by 3 ghosts. Hades was cracking himself up. Of course, Jacob and the witches had no idea what he was talking about, but he didn't care. He loved making himself laugh. He knew no one funnier. I know what's missing, Hades said, snapping his fingers again and making a monocle appear on Jacob's face. Yes, now you're perfect. Hades couldn't help but smile at this man. He really liked Jacob, and he was happy the man accepted his gifts in the spirit they were intended. You look very handsome, Jacob. Every bit the gentleman we know you are, said Hazel, tears in her eyes. I don't know why we hadn't thought to get you some new things. You've been busy, my queen. Don't let your heart be disquieted. I know you love me, Jacob said, and a tear slid down Hazel's cheek. Yes, Jacob. Wait until Snow sees you next time she visits. She's going to swoon, said Primrose, lightening the mood. Hades could feel that Jacob took their words sincerely. He knew how much these witches loved him, which was only outmatched by the love he had for them. Hades was quite jealous of Jacob, cheating death as he had and living eternally in the company of such fine witches. I'm pleased to see you living so well now, Sir Jacob. You deserve every happiness after what you've suffered, what you've endured. I'm envious of the life you have now, said Hades, and he could feel his words touched Jacob so deeply that he didn't know how to respond, so Hades quickly changed the subject. I'm afraid I'm keeping you from the reason you came here in the first place, Sir Jacob. Please forgive me, said Hades, loving the way Primrose and Hazel were smiling at him. Yes, please excuse me, Lord and Ladies of Darkness, but dinner is being served in the dining room, from where you'll have a brilliant view of the lighting of the dead woods. If you would please follow me, he said, motioning his skeletal hand as if to usher them out of the room. Thank you, Jacob, but I think I'd rather be known as the Lady of Light, said Primrose, her face beaming as her laugh rang out making everyone else in the room join her. I think in time you will all be known as the Ladies of Light, said Hades, escorting the group out of the library and into the dining room. The dining room was large and rectangular, its walls gray stone like the rest of the oldest part of the mansion. One side of the room had a low wall, so it was open to the elements. This would normally give way to a view of the entire grounds, but it was pitch black in the dead woods now, and the only light in the dining room was coming from the large fireplace in the shape of a massive dragon's head, with a fire blazing within the dragon's mouth. On either side of the dragon's head, Hades noticed oval shapes on the stones that were lighter than the rest of the walls, revealing where portraits used to be. He assumed they were of the previous queens, likely taken down by Hazel and Primrose. After helping everyone to their seats, Jacob stood near one of the pillars on the side of the room that had a view of the grounds. It was a chilly evening, but the room was warm from the crackling fire that sparked from the dragon's mouth. It must be hard for you to live here, after everything that hag of a mother did to you, said Hades, making Primrose laugh. It feels like many lifetimes ago now, Hades, but thank you for saying so. I think that's why we were determined to bring a new era to the Deadwoods, and to the many kingdoms. But how do you know so much about us? Asked Hazel. I'm a god, Hazel. I know everything. Everything that's written in the Book of Fairy Tales and more, he said, drifting off into another time, as the ladies of the Deadwood often did themselves. Isn't it interesting how family has the power to hurt us so deeply? They can hurt us like no other. I think I read a line like that in Grimhilda's story, or maybe it was Ursula's. I can't remember, said Hades. That's my point. Almost all of us have been hurt by our families. But look at us now, making families of our own with people we choose to love, said Hades, feeling saddened that he had been estranged from his chosen family. He missed the odd sisters, as they once were. He missed sitting in their kitchen, drinking tea and laughing with them, and telling jokes they didn't understand. Listen to me, I sound like one of those sentimental fools in a made-for-TV movie. I'm afraid I'm giving you quite the wrong impression. I'm usually not this sappy. Hades looked at the witches sitting at the table with him, feeling content for the first time since he did the same with the odd sisters. I think we have the perfect impression of you, Hades, said Primrose. I'm happy you feel like you can be yourself around us. As the witches and Hades chatted, Jacob picked up a small silver tinderbox and ignited it, causing the flame to burst brightly in the dim room, getting their attention. He lit the candles that lined the low wall one by one, and when he lit the final candle, the dead woods were suddenly infused with light, causing the party to gasp in delight. Hades got up from his seat and stood near Jacob, looking at the endless sea of candlelight flickering in the darkness. He could see all the faces of the dead illuminated by the candlelight peering at him through the darkness, and was awed by the thousands of souls that resided in these woods. He suddenly had the urge to put his arm around Jacob's shoulders. This is one of the most beautiful spectacles I've ever seen. Thank you, Sir Jacob. He was inspired by the dead woods, inspired by Hazel, Primrose, and Circe. They didn't choose to be rulers of this land, and they were nothing like the queens who came before them, but they were making the lands their own and creating something new and unique. They weren't falling into bitterness and despair. They were creating something beautiful. Hades sat back down at the table as the skeleton servants came into the room, lighting more candles and carrying trays upon trays of desserts. On the long stone table that was draped with a deep red tablecloth were bowls of homemade ice cream with fresh berries, thick, fluffy whipped cream, warm chocolate fudge, shiny red cherries, delicious-looking cake, bowls of candy, and, of course, multiple pots of tea. Oh, look at this! Thank you, Primrose, he said, grinning. This is so thoughtful, just like the feast I had with the Odd Sisters. This was just the sort of thing he'd expect of Primrose. She was the most fun witch in the bunch, and the sweetest. He loved them all, but especially looked forward to adventures he might have with Primrose in the future. He was surprised he already loved these witches, but something about Primrose made his heart feel happy and light. He liked that he didn't always have to be on with these witches, and so far they hadn't made him lose his temper, not once. That must have been some sort of record. It was exhausting having to constantly cloak himself in sarcasm. He liked that he could show all the sides of his personality and still feel safe, just as he had started to do with the Odd Sisters before things went tragically wrong. I didn't arrange this feast, and I know it wasn't Hazel, since I can never talk her into having dessert for dinner, Primrose said, laughing. Hades wondered if it somehow Jacob had overheard the book of fairy tales playing in the library and took it upon himself to make this seemingly little gesture that actually meant so much to Hades. It wasn't Jacob, said Circe. Hades hadn't adequately shielded his thoughts from Circe. Never mind, he thought. I've nothing to hide from these witches. Hades hadn't expected Circe to warm to him. He was frankly surprised she hadn't lashed out and blamed him for everything she'd been through. Blamed him for what happened to her mothers. If anyone is to blame, it's the previous queens of the dead, said Hazel, also reading his mind. A pervasive evil has resided in this land since its creation. It was cultivated, celebrated, and became more perverse with each generation, causing a putrefaction of the previous queen's souls. And that foul magic was passed from one generation to the next. That is what caused the Odd Sisters to become what they are, and we refuse to ever let ourselves or the Deadwood succumb to that ever again. The Odd Sisters are as much victims as we were, said Hazel, her eyelashes glistening with tears, making her gray eyes sparkle in the firelight. Hades was thankful Circe had Primrose and Hazel. He looked forward to what lay ahead for the Deadwoods, with these fine witches as queens. With Primrose shining her light in dark places, her mind to the future, and Hazel helping them to explore the past and see it clearly, while Circe rooted herself in the present, fighting for what she loved. They were the fates of this land, the new Odd Sisters, and it sent a shiver through his body, realizing this for the first time. And he felt a bit sad that the Odd Sisters never took their places as queens in the Deadwood as he'd hoped they would. At least he could help these witches fulfill their fates, and perhaps change his own in the process. All hail the new queens of the dead! All hail Queen Circe, Primrose, and Hazel! Hades said, reaching for his goblet and motioning to the witches to do the same. Shall we continue listening to the Book of Fairy Tales while we enjoy this scrumptious feast? Hades conjured the book in his hand and put it on the table to the right of his place setting. Why not? I'm ready for some more pizzazz hands, said Primrose, making everyone at the table laugh again. Well then, let's spice things up and have it read in my voice, shall we? I'm a much better narrator anyway, said Hades. You can do that? Asked Primrose. My dear, of course I can. If Cruella de Vil can do it, why shouldn't I? I'm a god, after all. I can do whatever the blazes I want, said Hades. He tapped the book with his long fingers, and the book of fairy tales started to play, reciting the rest of Hades' story in his own voice.